Hi, everyone. This is Sarbjeet. You may be watching this in the Business Analysts in Demand, Business Analyst and Scrum Master in Demand Facebook group or YouTube channel. Today, we're going to be covering the topic of RTM, Requirements Traceability Matrix. This is a question that has come up many times as in my YouTube channel, as well as my Facebook group, in terms of what is an RTM, how is it used, and how is it beneficial. So today I'm going to cover all of those topics for you guys and help break this big, massive topic down into a manageable, understandable chunk of information for you. Before we get started, please let me know in the comments if you're watching this live or if you're watching this as a replay. That helps me figure out the timing of these live sessions to make sure that we get the mass majority of you guys watching us live so that we may have participation. So go ahead and let me know if you're watching me live or you're watching this segment as a replay. So with that said, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, in the Business Analyst and even sometimes Scrum Masters have to use an RTM on their projects. And generally, an RTM is the Requirements Traceability Matrix. And there's a number of reasons why we rely heavily on the RTM within our projects. And I'll go into those details here in a little bit shortly. So generally, I'll give you some background on the RTM. RTM is used generally in the waterfall scenario. Is used generally in the waterfall scenario. It is used after we have sign off on the requirements or BRD, FRD, whatever you have, where you're gathering requirements. Once you have business sign off on those requirements is when we establish an RTM. And the goal of an RTM is to take the requirements that where we have sign off, which is a baseline of our project, right? Once we have sign off on the requirements, we take those requirements and we put them in the RTM. The goal, the overarching goal for an RTM is to make sure that everything that we have from our approved requirements, right? Our stakeholders have signed off on this, right? To say that we're going to deliver, let's just say 55 requirements in our project. So we take those 55 requirements, we put them in our RTM, and throughout the life cycle of the project, we continue to map the original requirements to our production checkout in the RTM. So the goal is to follow your requirements. And you have to understand, in the waterfall scenario, still, even till today, we document a lot of our requirements using Word and Excel. And sometimes when you're managing or tracking requirements using Word and Excel, there's a quite bit of a possibility of forgetting to deliver or forgetting some of the requirements that need to be built out, okay? So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna show you an example of an RTM and show you the different components that go into an RTM to make it complete and useful, with the caveat that there may be some scenarios, even in the Agile environment, where we may be using an RTM. In the Agile environments, the reason why we don't use an RTM is because we have, in a digital format, using tools such as Jira or other tools, we have mechanisms to track all of our requirements, right? So all of our requirements, as we know in Agile, first go into a product backlog, right? Then they go into, once we have a product backlog, once we start to refine the user stories, we start to put them in a sprint backlog. From the sprint backlog, we identify in progress, complete, done, right? And once those are done, we have an output of everything at some point that was in the product backlog to completion. So we have a digital copy. There may be some scenarios, even in Agile, that you may need to do an RTM, but that's very far in a few. Majority of the time, 99.9% of the time, we see an RTM in the waterfall scenario. And as I mentioned a little bit earlier, we have an RTM in the waterfall scenario because lots of requirements are still being managed using Word and Excel, tools like Word and Excel. Okay, let me know, let me pause there and see if there's any questions. If there aren't any, I will continue moving on and showing you what an RTM looks like. Okay, while I wait for that, let me start to share my screen. Let me pull this up. Okay, So this is an RTM that I've used for one of my projects called non-twist. So this is an RTM, and here are the components of an RTM. So first we have, so when we write requirements in a BRD, we have generally different ID numbers or numberings to make sure that we number our requirements sequentially based on the area or functionality that we're talking about, right? So each of your requirements in a BRD or an FRD should have unique identifiers, which goes into this column right here. Then we identify in the RTM the type of requirement, functional or non-functional. Then we have a requirements description, right? High level, what is this requirement about? And then we copy and paste the detailed requirement that we may have in our requirements document. And then the next column, and again, this is a template that I've created for my project. There are many different templates out there, so you guys have to figure out and identify a template that's going to work for you in your organization. Oftentimes your organization will have templates that they want you to use, but in the event that they don't have one, the most common information that you need in RTM is your requirements ID that you copy from your BRD or FRD, your high level detail, and then the rest of the scenarios in which you're going to trace the requirements. So you'll have the requirements design document reference, your technical specification reference, your test cases, and then identify whether QA has tested the requirements or not, right? And then also indicate pass or fail, UAT, whether it was pass or fail, implemented, and then the production checkout. So generally, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, the goal of an RTM is to track the requirement from the origination, which was signed off, to then completion, which is generally done at the production checkout level. Again, I said that your RTM may look different. There's many organizations that have different templates. Your organization may have one. In the absence, if your organization does not have one, there are key areas that you need to absolutely have in your RTM, and I will try to go ahead and highlight this. And what I'll do is I will create a template of this. Not that I don't want yellow. What color should I have? I want green, maybe. So green will identify, I'll make this into a template and send it to you, add it to our Facebook group or in the comments of the areas that you need to definitely have in your RTM. Okay, so this one. I have different colors. Okay, so here now what I've done is I've highlighted some things that you definitely need to have as part of your RTM, and I'll talk about what these things are in just a moment. Okay, and I will create this as a template and send it to you or include it in the comments area for you. So talking about an RTM, you definitely need to have your requirement ID because that's how you link it back. If you need to go back and reference to your BRD related to a requirement, you can go back and identify what requirement that is in your 100-page document, right? So it just makes things a little bit easier. You need to identify high-level description of the requirement. You need to identify the detail level of the requirement. You may also need to link to other requirements IDs because, for example, here in this requirement, we're only talking about a home page, but then there may be other requirements that reference the building out of a home page, and therefore those requirements are linked together, right? You also should identify whether each requirement is mandatory or optional. Oftentimes we only focus on mandatory, so that may be helpful. And as you're in the waterfall scenario, as your document, as your requirements, or as your project progresses, right, you will go from BRD, right, or functional BRD or FRD, then you will have a design document, then you will have a technical specification document, and then you will have test cases or test scripts that are created by QA. And so at each iteration, what happens is you take your BRD, then it goes to the UI UX team members, and then they will have a design document, right, based on your requirements. And then from there, generally it's done in parallel, design and then technical specifications. Your business systems analyst or your developers will take your requirements and then create a technical specification document. So what originates as your BRD or FRD actually morphs into many different documentation based on where the project is. And so what we want to do is, because there's so many documents within the waterfall scenario, we want to be able to link each requirement for the homepage, for example, to the design document that we have now, to the technical specifications, and then to the test cases, to make sure that the requirement that we had at the original, when we started the project for the homepage, we can identify the design elements, we can identify how technically this is going to be done, and then when it comes to testing, identify how are we going to be able to test that this homepage that we are building out is meeting the requirements that our stakeholders wanted us to meet. Okay, so once we have our test cases, then we identify whether this particular, and you may have many, many more test cases for one particular requirement. And it's often possible that you will have many, many, many test cases for one requirement. So you will list all of those here. You will identify if QA tested this requirement and whether it's passed or failed. And then you will also indicate if UAT tested and if UAT passed or failed. And then you will also indicate if this particular requirement was implemented with the release, and then also if a production checkout has happened, right? Again, there's a lot of moving parts when we work on waterfall waterfall scenario. There's lots of documentation and moving parts. So the RTM, the goal of the RTM is to try to organize and identify in one document tracking of whether the 55 requirements we have for a particular project, if they've actually been implemented, if they've been designed, if they've been, have technical requirements around them, if they've been tested, if they tested by our QA, have they been tested by our users during UAT testing, and if that particular requirement was implemented, and then if we even had the production checkout. So those are the key areas that we have in RTM. One last time, there are many reasons to have an RTM. One of the most viable reasons, and the one that we focus on the most, is to make sure that we are tracking from requirements baseline, which is when the requirements have been signed off, to when we deliver the project, that everything that we intended, the 55 requirements that I said at the beginning of this live session, if we have signed up for 55 requirements as part of this project, that we at the end of the project have delivered all of those 55 requirements based on the functionality that we're working on. Okay, so that is all for the RTM. I will pause here and see if you guys have any questions for me. Let me know if you have any questions, and also let me know if you're watching this live or if you're watching this as a replay. And if I'm not able to get to your questions now, if you're watching this on a replay, leave your questions in the comments area. Leave your questions in the comments area. I promise to get back to you. I do read all of the comments and respond. And if I sometimes feel that you need, it's maybe a better to do a video explanation for your questions, I'll do that as well. But most of the time, I will respond to you it takes me a little bit of time to get back to you, but I do get back to you. Okay, I don't see any questions for now. So I guess that's it. I will post more training topics. All of my training topics come from the questions that you may have either on Facebook or my YouTube channel. So keep posting questions, keep posting comments, and I will create for the next set of few weeks our training modules or agenda for the upcoming weeks to come. Okay. With that said, thank you everyone, and hope you have a great rest of your weekend. I'll see you again next weekend. This is Sarabjit signing off. Hope you guys have a great rest of your weekend. Bye.